Darley Waters' fame did not begin and end with the fleeting visit of Stewart and his band. In the 1920s, rather shadowy couple by the name of Pierce came to Darley Waters and opened a shop with a borrowed £20. Amazingly, they did pretty well. Within a few years, they had a shop, a hotel, a pub, and an aerodrome. Darley Waters became a stop-off point between Brisbane and Darwin on the run to Singapore and on to London in the early days of Qantas and the old Imperial Airways. Lady Mountbatten was among the first overnight guests at the hotel. Goodness knows what she made of the place, though I dare say she was just awfully glad to be on solid ground. In the early days, a commercial flight from London involved, in addition to nerves of steel, 42 refueling stops, up to 5 changes of aircraft, and a train journey through Italy because Mussolini wouldn't allow flights through Italian airspace. It took 12 days. As well as the seasonal monsoons, the flight was subject to dust storms, mechanical failures, navigational confusion, and occasional pot shots from hostile or impish Bedouins. Crashes were not infrequent. The perils of aviation in the period are neatly encapsulated in the experience of Harold C. Brinsmead, the head of Australia's Civil Aviation Department in the first days of commercial aviation. In 1931, Brinsmead was on a flight to London, partly for business and partly to demonstrate the safety and reliability of modern air passenger services, when his plane crashed on takeoff in Indonesia. No one was seriously hurt, but the plane was a write-off. Not wanting to wait for a replacement aircraft to be flown in, Brinsmead boarded a flight on a new Dutch airline, KLM. That flight crashed while taking off in Bangkok. On this occasion, 5 people were killed and Brinsmead suffered serious injuries from which he never recovered. He died 2 years later. Meanwhile, the surviving passengers carried on to London in a replacement plane. That plane crashed on the return trip. Darley Waters claims to be Australia's oldest international airport, though I suspect many other venerable airstrips make a similar boast. It is certainly true that it was used as a stop-off point on some international flights and more regularly on cross-country flights from Queensland to Western Australia, so it was a kind of crossroads. The airport stayed open until 1947. The pub opened in 1938, so it is not by any stretch the oldest in the outback or the Northern Territory, but it is certainly one of the most extraordinary. As with most outback pubs, every inch of interior surface, walls, rafters, wooden support posts, was covered with mementos left by earlier visits. College ID cards, driver's licenses, folding money from many nations, bumper stickers, badges from various police and fire departments, even a generous and arresting assortment of underwear which dangled from rafters or was nailed to the wall. The rest was nicely spalten. A large but basic central bar, concrete floor, bare tin roof, an assortment of tables and chairs of different vintages and styles, a battered pool table. At the bar, 7 or 8 men, all in shorts, t-shirts, boots, and bush hats, stood drinking stubbies, squat bottles of beer, served in insulated foam holders to keep them cold. They all looked hot and dusty, but then everything in Darley Waters was hot and dusty. The atmosphere in the pub can best be described as convivially sweltering. Even standing still, the sweat dripped off us. The windows had screens, but most were full of holes, and anyway the doors were wide open so flies came in freely. The men at the bar gave me compact but friendly nods as I bellied up to the bar and obligingly made space for me to stand to order, but showed no special interest in me as an outsider. Clearly, as the souvenirs attested, visitors were not a novelty. I acquired a pair of chilled stubbies and conveyed them to the table where Alan sat beneath a bumper sticker commemorating a visit by the Where the Few Carly Touring Club. Alan was suffused with a strange happiness. "You like it here?" I said. He shook his head with a kind of speechless delight. "I do, I actually do. But I thought you hated it." "I did," he said. "But then I was sitting here looking out the window at the setting sun, and it was lovely. I mean, really quite astoundingly lovely. And then I turned and saw the bar with all these outback characters, and I thought, bugger me, I like it here." He looked at me in the frankest wonder. "And I do, I really like it. I'm so pleased." He drained his beer and rose. "You ready for another?" Now it was my turn to be filled with wonder. I started to point out that it was a touch early to be set in such a blistering pace. But then I thought, what the hell? We had come a long way, and this place was after all built for drinking. I drained my bottle and handed it over. "Sure," I said. "Why not?" Well, I can't pretend I remember a great deal of what followed. We drank huge amounts of beer, huge amounts. We ate steaks the size of catcher's mitts. They may actually have been catcher's mitts, and washed them down with more beer. We made many friends. We circulated as if at a cocktail party. I talked to ranchers and sheep shearers, to nannies and cooks. I met fellow travelers from around the world and talked for some time to the proprietor, one Bruce Caterer, who told me the complicated story of how he had come to own a pub in this lonely and far-flung spot, of which confidence I have not the tiniest recollection, and certainly nothing approximating a note. As the evening wore on, the bar grew almost impossibly crowded and lively. Where all the people were coming from, I couldn't guess. What was certain was that there were at least 50 cheerfully committed drinkers tucked away in the bush in the vicinity of Darley Waters, and at least as many visitors like us. I got comprehensively beaten at pool by at least 14 people. I bought rounds for strangers. I called my wife and professed my lasting devotion. I giggled at any story told me and radiated uncritical affection in all directions. I would have gone anywhere with anyone. I awoke the next morning fully clothed and on top of the bedding, with no clear memory past the catcher's mitt portion of the evening and a head that felt like a train crash. I pressed my watch to an eyeball and groaned at the discovery that it was nearly 10 o'clock. We were hours late if we were ever going to get to Alice Springs. I stumbled down to the bathroom and put myself through some cursory ablutions, then found my way blearily into the pub. Alan sat propped against a wall with his eyes closed, a cup of black coffee steaming untouched before him. There was no one else around. "Where coffee where?" I croaked in a tiny voice. He indicated vaguely with a weak hand. In a side room I found an urn of hot water and containers of instant coffee, tea bags, powdered milk, and sugar with which to make a hot beverage. I loaded a cup half full with instant coffee powder, dribbled in some water, and rejoined Alan. Weakly, in the manner of an invalid, I lifted the cup and introduced a little coffee to my lips. After a couple of more sips, I began to feel a little better. Alan, on the other hand, looked terminally wretched. "How late were we up?" I asked. "Late." "Very late?" "Very." "Why are you sitting with your eyes closed?" "Because if I open them, I'm afraid I'll bleed to death." Did I disgrace myself? I peered around the room to see if my boxer shorts were draped from any rafters. "Not that I recall. You were shit at pool." I nodded without surprise. I often use alcohol as an artificial check on my pool playing check skills. It's a way for me to help strangers gain confidence in their abilities and get in touch with my inner wallet. "Anything else?" I asked. "You were doing a house swap next summer. You're doing a house swap next summer with a family from Korea." I pursed my lips thoughtfully. "North or south?" I asked. "Not sure. You're making this up, aren't you?" He reached over and deftly plucked from my shirt pocket a business card which he presented to me. It said Park Ho Lee, meat wholesaler, or something, and gave an address in Busan. Underneath it, in my own handwriting, it said June 10th to August 27th. No worries. I placed the card, folded once, in the ashtray. "I think I'd like to get out of here now," I said. He nodded and with an effort of will rose from the table, wobbled ever so slightly, and went off to gather up his things. I hesitated a long moment and followed. 10 minutes later we were